Velora Draine once dazzled Edenmark's elite with her flawless designs and cold charm. But when Norlan Kreeg, her wealthiest client, vanished without a trace, the threads of her glamorous life began to unravel, revealing a deadly ambition stitched together with greed, deceit, and murder. Velora Draine lived a life many admired from a distance. Her photos online showed her walking through marble-floored penthouses, dining at exclusive restaurants, and lounging by rooftop pools with crystal-clear views. She was only 29, but had already built a reputation in Edenmark City as a rising star in luxury interior design. With a keen eye for detail and a polished personal style, Velora seemed unstoppable. She ran a boutique firm, Draine Interiors, and often worked with wealthy clients looking to redesign their homes with flair. On the surface, she had it all: beauty, business, and a perfect life. But Velora's reality was very different behind closed doors. Her company, while impressive on the outside, was bleeding money. Most of her projects had gone over budget, clients had backed out midway, and suppliers were demanding overdue payments. Her bank accounts were shrinking, credit cards maxed out, and private loans quietly stacking up. Her social media presence masked a rapidly crumbling world. Every post was calculated, every smile practiced. She couldn't let anyone know how bad things had gotten. She was too invested in the illusion she had created. One of Velora's longtime clients was Norlan Kreeg, a 72-year-old retired investment broker who lived alone in a grand estate on the outskirts of the city. Norlan was quiet, reclusive, and extremely wealthy. He had hired Velora to help modernize parts of his mansion, particularly his private study and sunroom. The project started small, but gradually expanded into multiple rooms, increasing her access to his home and to him. Norlan trusted her. He wasn't tech-savvy, rarely communicated with family, and lived in near isolation. He liked Velora's style, her charm, and the way she made his space feel alive again. Then, without warning, Norlan vanished. At first, no one noticed. He had no children and only one sister who lived across the country. It wasn't until weeks passed without her receiving his usual monthly call that she became concerned. She contacted local police to request a welfare check. Officers arrived at Norlan's home, found his car still in the garage, his mail uncollected, and his phone inside. But he was gone. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle. The kitchen had a half-finished cup of coffee. The television was still plugged in. When police began asking questions, Velora claimed she hadn't seen Norlan in weeks. She said their design project had been paused due to budget delays. She seemed calm, composed, and professional. But investigators were already suspicious. Norlan's financial records showed several large payments made to Draine Interiors just a few days before he disappeared. Additionally, new furniture had been ordered to the estate and signed for by someone using Velora's initials. Authorities decided to search Norlan's home more thoroughly. During the second sweep, they noticed something odd in the basement hallway: a door behind an antique bookshelf. It was locked tight and appeared unused. After obtaining a warrant, they forced the door open and found a hidden room with padded walls, a broken camera tripod, and a heavy chemical odor. On the floor, bloodstains were barely visible beneath a torn rug. Lab testing confirmed it was Norlan's blood. Nearby, investigators found a half-burnt cloth bearing the embroidered letters VD. Still, there was no body. No clear proof. Velora had done anything, just connections, suspicions, and unsettling clues. As they dug deeper, police also discovered that Velora had recently bought a large outdoor tarp, industrial rope, and several bags of lime from different hardware stores across the county, using cash and wearing wigs to avoid recognition on security cameras. The purchases were made within days of Norlan's disappearance. Even though investigators couldn't arrest her yet, the pressure was growing. Something didn't add up. Velora was not just hiding financial trouble. she might be hiding something far more sinister. All they needed now was a break. And it was coming faster than she realized. The case took a dark turn when investigators returned to Norlan Kreeg's mansion for a third and more intensive search. They had obtained a broader warrant and were now authorized to take apart fixtures, floorboards, and anything else that might conceal evidence. In the basement, the strange hidden room had already raised red flags, but this time they were determined to uncover its secrets. Forensics teams arrived with luminol to detect blood traces invisible to the naked eye. When they sprayed the solution across the walls and floor, the room lit up like a crime scene map. Blood splatter patterns revealed that a violent struggle had taken place, one that matched no plausible explanation other than an assault. Next to a shattered camera lens on the floor, they found 2 rubber gloves with Velora's partial fingerprint impressions inside. Though not enough for a conviction, they were enough to deepen suspicion. More telling was the discovery of a storage closet connected to the room. Inside were boxes of antiques, silverware, and rare collectible items that Norlan had listed on his insurance policy as irreplaceable. Some were broken, others packed for transport, and several had auction tags on them. This raised a new theory. Velora might not have just killed Norlan, she may have done it for money. But despite the damning evidence, there was still no body. And without a body, there was no official murder. The case couldn't move forward until they could prove Norlan was dead. The break finally came 2 weeks later, completely by accident. A pair of hikers exploring the Lornwood Forest, about 60 miles northeast of Edenmark City, stumbled upon a horrific sight. Near a ravine, hidden beneath a pile of leaves and mud, was a large designer tarp. Inside was a badly decomposed human body, wrapped tightly with golden curtain cord and smeared with chemical burns. The smell was overwhelming, and signs of animal disturbance made the scene even more gruesome. Investigators rushed to the location and confirmed what they had feared. It was Norlan Kreeg. Dental records matched. The cause of death was blunt: force trauma to the skull, with evidence of sedation drugs in his bloodstream. Someone had beaten him, drugged him, and disposed of him with enough planning to delay discovery. But the killer had made one mistake. Inside the tarp, stuck in a fold, was a small, crumpled receipt for a wine delivery. It had Velora's company name on it and was dated just 3 days before Norlan went missing. Investigators traced the delivery to a specialty wine boutique that catered to elite clients. Velora had placed the order using her business account, and records showed she had personally picked up the package. The wine matched the same bottle found shattered in the hidden room's corner, its broken glass still embedded with traces of Norlan's blood. The arrest happened swiftly. Officers arrived at Velora's high-rise apartment in the middle of the night. She didn't resist. She didn't speak. She only stared as they listed the charges: second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, theft, and obstruction. Her carefully curated life began to unravel in public as news stations splashed her face across every screen. In the days that followed, more disturbing details emerged. Surveillance footage placed Velora's SUV near Lornwood Forest on the day of Norlan's disappearance. She had parked off-road, hidden beneath a tree line for nearly 3 hours. Phone records showed her device was mysteriously turned off during that window. And at her office, police found sketches for a new logo, one that excluded her original partner and hinted at a complete rebranding. Investigators now believed she had planned to launch a new luxury firm with stolen funds from Norlan's estate. The puzzle pieces came together. The motive became clear. Velora hadn't just wanted money. She wanted complete reinvention. The failure of her business, the mounting debt, the desperation to appear successful, these weren't just stressors. They were triggers. Norlan had been her opportunity, but in the end, he became her downfall. The prosecution was building a strong case, but what no one knew yet was how far Velora had fallen and how she would completely break once she entered prison. The trial was still ahead. The media was watching closely, and Velora Draine, the woman who once controlled every image of her life, was about to lose all control. Velora's trial became one of the most publicized cases in Edenmark City's history. News vans lined the courthouse every morning, and courtroom sketches were plastered across newspapers and online platforms. The public was obsessed with her double life, the glamorous designer who had, according to prosecutors, killed a wealthy client in cold blood. Reporters called her the Velvet Killer, a nickname that reflected both her refined image and the disturbing crime she was accused of. Despite the overwhelming attention, Velora appeared calm during the early days of the trial. She wore neutral colors, styled her hair conservatively, and sat still behind her lawyers. Some said she looked like a grieving woman caught in a misunderstanding. Others believed it was all part of her act. Her defense team argued that the case against her was purely circumstantial. They claimed Norlan Kreeg had enemies from his financial career and suggested the hidden room in his mansion had been used for purposes unrelated to Velora. They implied the estate had become a target because of Norlan's wealth and that Velora was being scapegoated due to her business connections to him. The defense tried to poke holes in the prosecution's timeline, questioned the reliability of surveillance footage, and even challenged the authenticity of the wine receipt found with the body. They framed her as a woman being crushed by assumptions and labeled as a killer because she dared to live a glamorous life. But the prosecution had something far more powerful than assumptions. They had digital evidence. A forensic team had recovered deleted footage from Velora's cloud backup. The file was incomplete and partially corrupted, but the content was unmistakable. In the dimly lit video, Norlan could be seen slumped in a chair, his hands bound, his face bruised. He appeared dazed, possibly drugged. Though the audio was damaged, movement in the background revealed stacked boxes and luxury items. The boxes matched those found in the mansion's basement storage closet, the same ones marked for transport. The implication was chilling. Velora hadn't just killed Norlan. She had taken her time, staging the house, preparing his valuables, and covering her tracks. Even more damning was the vehicle tracking data. Velora's SUV had a built-in GPS feature that had been overlooked at first. When pulled from the manufacturer, it revealed detailed route history. On the day of Norlan's disappearance, the vehicle had traveled to Lornwood Forest, paused for several hours, and then returned late at night. Combined with phone metadata, investigators proved Velora had disabled her mobile device during that period to avoid detection. The courtroom grew silent when this evidence was presented. Jurors sat motionless, eyes fixed on the screens. The polished woman they had seen in the courtroom began to fade. In her place, a different picture emerged, of a person driven by desperation, control, and greed. The prosecution closed by showing a timeline of financial transactions made by Velora in the weeks following Norlan's death. She had paid off part of her business loan, purchased new branding material, and even initiated a real estate inquiry into a second office location. By the end of the trial, the narrative was unshakable. The jury didn't take long. After just under 3 hours of deliberation, they returned a unanimous verdict: guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced Velora Draine to 38 years in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 28 years. She remained silent as the sentence was read. No visible reaction, no protest, just the same cold stare she had worn through most of the proceedings. What stunned observers, however, wasn't just the outcome. It was the fact that Velora seemed entirely disconnected from it, as if she believed this wasn't the end, as if some part of her still thought she could reshape the story. But prison had its own rules, and Velora was about to enter a place where none of her strategies would work. She had controlled the narrative her entire life. That control was now over. When Velora arrived at Verlan State Correctional Facility, the reality of her sentence began to settle in, but not in the way most expected. She walked through the prison gates with her head high, her expression unreadable. Despite being shackled and surrounded by guards, Velora carried herself like she was entering a hotel lobby rather than a maximum security prison. Some inmates noticed it instantly. Her carefully ironed uniform, her spotless white sneakers, her refusal to make eye contact with anyone. She was still clinging to the life she had left behind, still pretending she wasn't like the rest of them. The first few days were uneventful. Velora kept to herself and ignored the prison routines. She refused most of the food, barely spoke during orientation meetings, and avoided communal spaces. She assumed she would be treated differently, perhaps given special privileges because of her case's publicity. She underestimated how little that mattered in prison. Here the crimes didn't make you interesting. They made you a target. Her fellow inmates quickly pegged her as arrogant, weak, and disconnected from reality. The guards saw her as just another manipulator trying to play a role. Her cellmate, Jakra Thorne, was a lifer. Jakra had been in Verlaine for 15 years already, and she didn't care for pretenders. Velora tried to talk to her about design, business, anything to avoid silence, but Jakra shut it down early. The dynamic between them grew tense. Velora's attempts to reorganize their tiny shared space, keep her possessions meticulously aligned, and request extra hygiene products were seen as acts of entitlement. She filed complaints against the food, the noise, the lighting, none of which were taken seriously. In prison, nobody cared about your comfort. Soon, things began to shift. Velora's hair, once professionally styled and dyed every few weeks, began to lose its shine. Without access to her expensive products, it became brittle, then started falling out in clumps from stress. Her nails, once manicured weekly, cracked and bled. She tried to clean her uniform obsessively, but the constant dust, sweat, and industrial laundry systems made it impossible. She begged the infirmary for skincare items, but all she got was petroleum jelly and a warning not to abuse the request system. Isolation began to weigh on her. The other inmates whispered about her, sometimes loudly, sometimes just loud enough for her to hear. They made fun of her posture, her accent, her quiet sobs at night. Velora tried writing letters to old friends, former clients, anyone who might send money or visit. The responses were minimal. Her former assistant sent one card, awkward and formal. No one else reached out. The world she had built was gone, and none of it followed her behind the prison walls. After 3 months, Velora stopped going to the rec yard. She started skipping meals entirely, eating only dry crackers she hoarded from breakfast trays. She lost over 20 pounds. Her skin turned pale and dull. Eventually, her refusal to eat led to fainting spells, and she was rushed to the prison hospital twice within a single week. Medical staff noted signs of deep depression and extreme anxiety. She was placed on suicide watch for a short period, during which her access to even basic privileges was taken away. The fall from grace was total. What broke her most wasn't the punishment or even the environment. It was the complete absence of power. In her old life, Velora had control over how she looked, where she went, what she said, and how others saw her. In prison, there were no filters, no carefully selected angles. Here, she was Velora Draine, inmate 3041B. Her opinions didn't matter. Her complaints were ignored. Her tears meant nothing. The worst part was that no one treated her like she was special anymore. She was just another woman in a uniform, trapped, in a place she never thought she'd end up. And finally, after months of pretending, the mask began to fall. Velora realized that she was no longer in charge of her story. Reality had hit her, and it hit hard. Months passed. Velora Draine, once the face of luxury and confidence, now moved through Verlaine State Correctional Facility like a ghost. The arrogance that had once clung to her like perfume had faded. She no longer kept her uniform spotless, no longer combed her thinning hair into neat buns. Her face was sunken, her voice rarely heard. Other inmates didn't mock her anymore. not because they respected her, but because they had stopped noticing her. She had become invisible. Reality didn't hit Velora like a single slap. It was more like a slow, choking tide that dragged her deeper every day. She had thought prison would be a temporary disruption, a mistake that would be corrected on appeal, or perhaps something her lawyers could reverse in time. But the weeks turned into months, and the silence from the outside world grew louder. Her business was dissolved. Her accounts were frozen. Her old apartment was rented to a new tenant. Her possessions auctioned. There was nothing left to go back to. Her name, once respected, now brought only disgust and curiosity. Her health declined. Chronic fatigue set in, worsened by poor nutrition and stress. She was diagnosed with ulcers from prolonged anxiety and placed on medication. The prison psychiatrist met with her weekly, but Velora rarely spoke more than a few words. She was no longer interested in manipulating perception. She no longer had an audience. Every mirror in the facility reminded her that the woman she once was no longer existed. Her eyes, once sharp and full of ambition, now looked tired and glassy. Then came the mandatory work assignment. Every inmate had to contribute to the prison's internal labor system. Velora was assigned to laundry duty, a hot, humid room filled with steam, bleach, and constant noise. The work was repetitive and physically exhausting. She sorted piles of dirty uniforms, scrubbed stubborn stains, and operated the clunky industrial machines that never quite worked right. Her hands cracked from detergent burns, and her back ached constantly. She considered asking to be reassigned, but quickly learned that requests were rarely granted, and never for someone like her. In that laundry room, something began to change in Velora. Not redemption, not transformation, but acceptance. She stopped waiting for letters. She stopped counting the days. For the first time since her sentencing, she accepted that this was her life now. No cameras, no curated moments, just noise, sweat, and long, slow days. She began to observe rather than resist. She watched how other inmates coped, how they shared secrets, food, and small joys. She noticed the quiet strength of those who had survived far worse. Some women offered her small gestures, a protein bar, a stick of deodorant, a nod during meals. They didn't pity her. They simply understood what it meant to lose everything. By her second year, Velora began to adapt, not with the flair of her past, but with the quiet endurance that prison demanded. She found a rhythm in the monotony. She followed routines not to maintain appearances, but to survive the weight of time. Her body grew leaner, her face more weathered. Her hands bore the marks of hard work. She started speaking more during therapy, acknowledging guilt not as a performance, but as something real, something that lingered and pressed against her at night when the silence grew too loud to bear. There was no forgiveness waiting for Velora outside, no career comeback, no second chance. The world had moved on without her, and she knew it. But within the prison walls, she was finally becoming honest, with herself, if no one else. The woman who once built an empire of lies now folded clothes and scrubbed floors, not to prove anything, but because there was nothing else to do. Reality hadn't just hit Velora Draine. It had stripped her bare, and what remained wasn't a killer in designer heels or a mastermind behind a crime. What remained was a broken woman, learning how to live in the ruins of the life she destroyed with her own hands.